Welcome, everybody. This is the Yaron Brook Show, and I'm particularly excited to be talking today with Saad. We were introduced by Mark Pellegrino last summer, and we've been trying to coordinate a time to talk, and it's finally here. So welcome, God. Good to have you on the Yaron Brook Show.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad to be with you.
Wonderful. And, there's one of the things that strikes me at looking at your bio is the parallels between your life and my life. There seem to be really interesting parallels. We were both born in the same part of the world, not that far from each other. We both emigrated and left. We both became atheists. We're both honorary members, I guess, through Dave Rubin of the intellectual dark web, although I think you probably belong there more than I do. And they're just, I think we have a similar attitude towards Islam and towards religion generally and towards a lot of things. So it is kind of the journeys I find kind of fascinating.
You do beat me in one dimension. You live in Southern California. I don't.
Well, I don't anymore.
Oh, you don't?
No, I have moved to Puerto Rico.
Oh, okay. So now there's absolutely zero reason for me to be envious of you.
Well, I don't know. You live in the cold of Toronto, so
Montreal,
even worse. So in terms of cold, but. No, I'm enjoying Puerto Rico. So, and in terms of taxes, you should be very, 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 very jealous of me. We can talk about that offline.
Sure.
But I moved here recently. You also left the Middle East at a younger age than I did, and I visited Beirut after uninvited after you had left. So I was in Beirut in 1982 as part of my military service in the Israeli army. So
well, the story is that had my father won the argument with my mother as to where to emigrate out of Lebanon, he was certainly happy to move to Israel because we have a lot of family there. Yeah. Had he won that argument, then I would have been with you probably. I'm guessing I'm a bit younger than you.
You're 3 years younger than me.
Okay, so I would have been at exactly the age of my first year of military service, and so I would have been and of course I speak Arabic, so I would have been the first guy into Lebanon.
Absolutely, yeah. So there's a ton to talk about because I know there's a lot of stuff going on in the world right now that we're both interested in, and I think at least it seems like there's a lot of overlap in our views on. I'm also at some point want to talk about evolutionary psychology,
sure.
Partially because of my ignorance in the topic and partially because I'm trying to fit it in to kind of the framework I come at things from and see how it all works together. But let's just start with some of the kind of the political issues and the whole issue of free speech and how you came to this issue. Where, you're an academic, you're doing research. I mean, I didn't read your bio because everybody can find it, and it's amazing. I mean, the number of publications as a former academic, the number of publications is stunning. And that's another parallel. We both taught at business schools. I left early, but we both taught at business schools, and I never had that kind of publication list. Maybe I would have gotten tenure if I had that. And a number of books. So look God up. He's on Wikipedia, but his bio on the Concordia University website is very amazing. Plus, you're a Twitter god and you're a YouTube phenom. So I'm jealous on those two.
I don't sleep much.
I know the feeling.
So yeah, okay. If you want me to start with the sort of how I got moved to weigh in the freedom of speech issue, I mean there are several ways to address this. Let me start with sort of the more deeply personal one. So there is a book that by Eric Berne, I think, that looks at something called transactional analysis. What are the key scripts that define your life? In the same way that an actor receives a script and he has to play that particular role.
Sure.
And so that particular form of psychoanalysis tries to look at what are sort of the defining scripts that shape the trajectory that you take in life. And in sort of being introspective, I think the one word that maybe captures my trajectory best is the word freedom. And I'll give different examples of how that manifested itself in my life. in very, very different domains. So when I used to be a very competitive soccer player, I used to play the central midfield role, where I sort of, the number 10 role, where I sort of freely move around the field.
Yep.
Whenever I had
score the goals.
I scored I wasn't the top scorer. I scored goals, but I was much more the playmaker, the guy who touched the ball a lot.
Oh, so midfielder. Okay.
Midfielder. I tried to create a lot. Yeah. Now, whenever I would have a coach who would impose some positional restrictions on me, you're going to play a bit more to the left, you're going to cover this guy, suddenly that completely incapacitated me, because my ability to freely create, float around, which was probably my biggest skill, was lost. So here is one form of freedom that really defined whether I played really well or not. Then when I became an academic, the idea of only publishing in these 4 journals, because that's what you're supposed to do if you're in this field, I found it terribly constraining. I wanted to have the intellectual freedom to navigate through different landscapes, and therefore I ended up having the career path that I ended up having. And then when it comes to freedom in the way that you use the term, I despise, having come from the background that I come from in the Middle East, any intrusions to what I think is great about the societies that I immigrated to, right? The fact that we're supposed to be free. And so then add to that the fact that I'm someone who maybe rightly or wrongly can simply not stand bullshit, right? I'm offended. I'm genuinely angered. And which is not a good thing. It's not. It raises your blood pressure. It makes you upset at many things rather than not, right?
But it's also intellectual honesty. I think it's a really important characteristic. So having a good bullshit detector is valuable. I think in life it's valuable to your own thinking, but it also makes you an honest player. It makes you somebody who doesn't stand for bullshit.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
And so because of all that, as I started developing a reasonably broad platform because of all the social media, I thought that it was imperative for me to weigh in on all the intrusions to freedom that we are seeing, whether it be in the university or in the greater society. And of course, as you might imagine, there is a terrible cost to be had when you speak the way that I do. Now, it could come in very direct forms, such as you receive a lot of hate mail and threats and so on, but it could come in more subtle forms, whereby perhaps university can't fire you because you're tenured and you are who you are, but there are ways they can ostracize you. There are other jobs that you could have gotten that no longer. And so, but when I weigh the calculus, my most important sort of currency is when I go to bed at night and put my head on the pillow, whether I feel no regret at not having done something that I could have done. That's what I judge my actions on, and therefore I have to weigh in.
That's great. I mean, that's really this issue of integrity, having intellectual integrity, having integrity in one's life. So when did this issue of free speech, because I remember a time where I never thought about free speech. I just took it for granted. And partially now in Israel, I have to say, there were some limitations on my free speech, and one day I'll tell the story. But when I came to the U.S., part of my assumption was, yay, I'm in the land of freedom. I could say whatever. When did it occur to you that there was an issue here that, you could call somebody out on BS, but there were actually now penalties to be paid for doing that?
So I think I saw it in different spheres. So in my academic career, as someone who, and I guess we'll talk about this later, someone who founded and developed the field of evolutionary consumption, the application of evolutionary psychology to consumer behavior, I saw it there because most of the colleagues, not my natural sciences colleagues, but my social sciences colleagues, were, what is this idiot saying, this whole biology stuff? This is insane. What is he talking about sex differences? And so there was already there a sense that I was speaking something very heretical. I would get papers desk rejected where the editor would write back to me, and it would literally be as though I am communicating with an utter moron, right? Where he or she did not recognize, what does this biology have to do? Biology is relevant for the zebra and the mosquito. What are you talking about? We're consumers. We transcend that, right? But to
some extent, that's part of academia, isn't it? I mean, don't you see that in really anybody who's pushing the envelope, who's doing new work? I mean, I remember in finance, the people who started doing behavioral finance, which I agree with somewhat and disagree with other things, but they were doing new work, and it was new, and it was nobody would take them seriously for years. And then, of course, now everybody takes them seriously, and now they dominate the field. So Thaler and people like that. So
Thaler was my professor, by the way.
Okay.
So I'm very much I'm very much steeped in that tradition.
Yeah.
And so I first sort of saw it professionally in my academic career, but then as I would go out into the world and interact with people, oftentimes with academics, it struck me how constrained people were to just have open conversations, even in contexts where it wasn't public, right? We're just chatting at a party. Everybody weighed their every word, whereas I'm someone who's very irreverent. I just speak my mind, right? And okay.
Yeah.
So then that's the second place I saw it. And then, of course, in the greater society, when I started seeing all the identity politics and so on everywhere, I couldn't take it. I was like a pressure cooker. And in a sense, Twitter, because oftentimes people say, when you interact on Twitter, you seem oftentimes to be a bit more sarcastic. Well, it's because in a sense, Twitter is my means of letting out the steam from the pressure cooker, right? When I'm having this kind of conversation with you now, I have a different communication style than I'm going after some idiot on Twitter. So Twitter, in a sense, is my personal therapy. It allows me to deal with the craziness of the world.
Yeah. I can see that. I'm tempted on Twitter. I sometimes hold back, sometimes I don't, but I can see, because part of it's the cleverness of putting it into 144 characters and no longer kind of a real dig at, getting at somebody, and just, I used to tweet the State of the Union addresses, which was a lot of fun because I had something to say about every sentence, and plug in the president. It doesn't really matter.
Right.
I have something negative to say about almost everything they say. So it was a lot of fun. I noticed the free speech issue, I guess, really after 9/11. And I noticed it really on two sides of it. There was a sudden rise of patriotism where you couldn't criticize Bush, and there was a sudden pushback against anybody who criticized Bush. And I was very critical of Bush on his right, if you will. I thought he was a wimp. So right. I thought to deal with the threat that we really faced, you need to be a lot tougher, and you need to be, and people say, no, you can't do that. You can't criticize Bush. And then, so that was kind of from the right. And then from the left, oh my God, I mean, people would yell me down and demonstrate and attack. And I don't know if you know Daniel Pipes, but I was often with Daniel Pipes doing events after 9/11, and it was just mayhem. I noticed that them. I think before that, I really did take it for granted. Acknowledging the academic side, I think that's always existed. I think if you're pushing the envelope in academia, even on whether what you're doing is right or wrong, I mean, put that aside, just pushing the envelope and challenging the authorities to be. It's part of the tenure system. They reinforce themselves. It's always there. But on the culture, it was 9/11 really struck me as this real change in the culture.
Yeah, I mean, I think I probably agree with that because there are different consequences to trying to restrict someone's open and honest dialogue about an issue. And I suppose there is no greater, important issue on a civilizational, scale than whether and how we handle the issue of whether, Islamic doctrines are consistent with our secular liberal democracies and so on. And so in that sense, I agree with you. What amazes me is the extent to which, and I've weighed in on this in other venues, the extent to which my academic colleagues refuse to even engage in a discussion on this topic, even in contexts where no one could know that they're taking these positions. So even if I want to have a private conversation with someone at a conference sitting at a bar, the amount of, hedging that they engage is, and it shows you, I mean, if you are this afraid, given the current demographic realities, do you want me to predict what's going to happen to your fear when it's 10 times where we are today? So I think I agree with you that where the sort of the issue went on steroids is precisely when Islam became so central to our daily lives.
Why do you think that is? What is it? Because it's absolutely that. You cannot, it's as if they've got a battle going on in their own minds. I'm not supposed to think this. I'm not supposed to say this. I'm not even supposed to hear this. And so you can't even have that conversation one-on-one with people because they're so afraid of the consequences, I guess.
So I think it's twofold. Let's talk about sort of the more banal one. Banal, but even more consequential. Yeah. People are literally physically afraid. They're afraid. I mean, right? I always tell people who think that all religions are equal, I say, why don't I set up 3 different websites for you under your name? And one will be critical of Jainism, one will be critical of Jehovah's Witness, one will be critical of Islam, and we will post your personal address, and then let's test your idea. That's a very easy way to empirically test your position. And then, of course, they kind of shut their mouths, right? But I think a second reason that's maybe a bit more difficult to actually penetrate is the fact that people have been parasitized by this notion that it is uniquely gauche and inappropriate to criticize Islam because, you know, it is a religion of the brown person. It is the religion of the downtrodden. Even though in most places where Islam rules, it's by far the majority. In most of the cultures, it's 98, 99, 100%. So they're hardly the minority in terms of the places where Islam rules. They really rule. But yet
they're still downtrodden in the sense of they're still poor.
They're poor, they're refugees, they're noble, they're exotic, right? And so to criticize Christianity is extraordinarily progressive. And if I want to be part of the academic ivory tower, to criticize some idiotic notion in Christianity makes me progressive. If I criticize something as idiotic, if not more so in Islam, well, that's just racist and bigoted. And so until we're able to convince people that there is nothing unique about Islam in your capability to attack it, to critique it, to ridicule it, to mock it, then we're going to have this problem.
Well, I was giving a talk at Oxford, and this one professor tried to convince me that while it was okay to criticize the West for slavery, it was wrong to criticize other cultures for slavery. That is, you, being a Westerner, can only comment on your own culture, and you have to just leave other cultures alone. And it was a woman. And I said, so you're okay with the way women are treated in Saudi Arabia? And she said, I wouldn't be okay with it if I were treated like this here, but I can't comment on, I can't have a position because this multiculturalism, it's so insidious.
It's unbelievable. Look, my next book will deal with what I call idea pathogens, right? So I analogize biological pathogens that parasitize brains. So, you know, the classic example I give, but there are many of these that I'll be covering in the book. Mice can be infected with a particular parasite that causes it to lose its innate fear of cats, right? Well, that's not a very good thing to not be afraid of cats when you are a mouse, right? There is a type of, there are ungulates, so elk, moose, deer, that when they become parasitized by a particular brain worm, they start engaging in what's called circling behavior. They go around in circle and they cannot extricate themselves. So if the predators are coming, they will still go around. So I argue that in the same way that there is this class of biological pathogens, human beings can also be parasitized by idea pathogens that will lead us down the path, you know, towards the abyss of infinite lunacy. So multiculturalism, identity politics, cultural relativism, postmodernism, radical feminism, all of these, each of them might not be sufficient to, make you collapse your edifice of reason, but put together, it becomes a tsunami of nonsense that's difficult to defeat.
Yeah, and I think that's fascinating because all ideas, I mean, all bad ideas are going to generate that. It's just a question of how many and to what extent. But and I think, and this relates, we'll talk about this more, I think reason is an achievement, right? So the default is all the crap. Right. The default is religion and mysticism of all, because I consider many of these ideologies mystical because they're not rooted in reality. They're not rooted in fact. So the default is mysticism and this and reason is an achievement. And if you let go of reason in any one of these ways, disaster follows. Exactly. Whether it's civilizational disaster or individual disaster, it's disaster follows.
So what you're basically saying is that it's easy for human minds to be parasitized by idiotic viruses, and you're exactly right. It takes great effort to actually not be parasitized, to be inoculated from these pathogens. You're right, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, in a sense, Rand viewed that effort as the essence of what free will is.
Right.
That effort to engage your reason is the essence of what free will is. It's to turn it on or to turn it off.
Be careful
engage
to
in
not.
the effort or not.
I was going to say, be careful. Never say free will with Sam Harris. He'll get very upset.
Oh no, I know. Every one of these members of the intellectual dark web, I have a whole list of things that I disagree with each one of them, and it's it's interesting. It makes for lively conversations.
It does.
Although many of them are avoiding me. So
I actually just was invited 2 weeks ago. I was speaking at the Association for Psychological Science conference in San Francisco. And I was delighted to be invited by, I guess, the gentleman who coined the term, Eric Weinstein.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, so he invited me. And he was, maybe he doesn't want me to say this, but we were speaking on the phone. He said, I just want to let you know that it wasn't me who did not include you in that list of intellectuals. And that, I think it's, he was being very gracious because at one point I was trolling the New York Times author who had, people literally thought, I'm sitting in my bedroom in a fetal position, sucking my thumb, crying. Why did I was trolling her? I was having fun. I had a smile on my face. Yeah. I said, "Don't worry about it, Eric. I'll learn to love again. It's okay."
Yeah, I think I'll always be on the margins, but I think you are deeply embedded in the intellectual dark web. So I think it'll be a while before anybody embraces me inside, except Dave. Right. Dave seems to be the connector. And the person who links us all together, which is wonderful. I mean, it's just I love the guy.
He's fantastic. Fabulous. I actually saw a thing somewhere, I don't know where, that had done exactly what you said. Sort of had done a first level sociometric analysis, and I think Dave was the top
in
connector
the middle
of all the
exactly. I think that's absolutely right. I think that's right. Yeah. So yes, I mean Islam really functions as one of these, but I've always viewed that the civilizational issue, and I wonder what you think of this, is not Islam, because I think it's pretty pathetic. It's us, right? It's our inability to define and defend Western values, what it is to mean Western values. If we actually had that conception, there would be a little pest that we could get rid of. It's not, they don't really have the weapons or the intellectual firepower, any kind of firepower to threaten us. It's our weakness
100%. Look,
that allows us. I mean,
you probably know this quote. It really, in several versions, it comes from several Islamic leaders and thinkers who have said the following. So I'll kind of paraphrase it. We will not conquer the West militarily. We will conquer the West in three ways: through the womb of our women, through hijra, immigration, that's the Arabic word, and by using your miserable freedoms against you. Yep. They say it loudly. They get on top of the mountain and give you the exact playbook. And you're exactly right that it is the weakness of the self-confidence in your own values that allows this playbook to play out, right? And I've often said that I despise the Western weakness a lot more than I do the Islamists. Absolutely. Because at least the Islamists are fighting for a cause. You may not like their cause, but at least they've got they act out their convictions, and you have to respect them for that in some diluted way. But the Western castrated coward, he's the worst of the worst.
I agree completely, and even those three. So I think they actually hurt their cause when they engage in violence, because it's that violence that wakes up the Westerner at least for 5 minutes to defend himself. But those three, all three, would be combated easily by the West saying, by the West assimilating them. And I think we have a powerful philosophy, a powerful ideology that would assimilate them. So it turns out that in America, the Muslims have fewer kids, that when they're better assimilated, they have fewer kids, all the three kind of drop away because they become American or they become Canadian or they become whatever. It's because we don't demand assimilation, because we don't know what to assimilate into. Like you ask a European, what is Europe? They don't know. They have no idea. What are Western values? Maybe they think Christianity, but that's their downfall if they think the West is Christianity. It really is the whole Islamic agenda falls apart if once the West stands on its 2 feet.
But the problem is that the person who is fully assimilated, it takes a very small committed interaction with the holy books to again, be revert to being problematic, right? So
Maybe.
so the question, my question, and of course you don't know who will succumb to that pull and who won't.
Sure.
My thinking is very simple. Any ideology, it doesn't matter which one, doesn't have to be only Islam, that is incongruent with our foundational values, I don't need to tolerate it. No one needs to tolerate it. So if you wish to come into our cultures and abide by our foundational values without us ceding a single millimeter on any of those values, welcome in, my brother. Let's live together in peace. If you don't, then there are many, many other cultures, many other places where you can exercise your right to your religion. But your religion never supersedes the right of a third party. It's really not that difficult.
Yeah, I mean, and again, I think if Western cultures committed themselves to separation of church and state, committed themselves to a female genital mutilation as a crime, and we will prosecute that crime, committed themselves to actually following the rule of law, then you get that. Then if they come and they don't belong, they leave, but you never surrender one iota to them. Exactly. My challenge is that some people would argue we should have a ideological test before they come in to the country. And that worries me to no end, because giving the government the power to decide on ideology scares the bejesus out of me. So I would rather government never thinks about ideology. We culturally enforce it.
And frankly, how difficult would it be for someone who is committed to cause, let's put it charitably, mischief, to beat any ideological test, right? I mean, it doesn't take an evil genius to beat. What do you think of female genital mutilation? Oh, I abhor it. What do you think of Jews? I love them. What do you think of gays? They're my closest friends. Geez, that took a lot of difficulty for me to beat the ideological test, right? So this is why I think all this vetting stuff is complete nonsense. I mean, yes, there is vetting that you make sure that somebody was not an active member of a terrorist group, but to really vet your heart and mind, bullshit.
No, I agree. And I've been arguing since 9/11. I don't know your position on this, but I've been arguing since 9/11 that all the West really needs to do is crush them. It's really defeat them, make it clear to them they cannot win. Psychologically, it's very difficult to become a passionate suicide bomber for a cause that you know is lost. So if we made it clear to them that their cause was lost, that they had no hope of ever achieving it, I think the appetite for the radicalization, for the suicide bombing would decline dramatically, and more of them would want to go with a winner, which is the West.
So let me give you a quick anecdote that comes from a saying that the Taliban members use. So they say apparently that the Americans have all the watches, but we have all the time in the world, right? Yep. Inshallah, right? So to speak to your point, I think that the temporal view of those who are committed to having ultimate peace around the world, where we all will be under the flag of Islam. So you see, Islam is a religion of peace. It seeks peace where we are all under the flag of Islam. How could you say that that's not peaceful, right? And so I think the issue is that the Western mindset is very different in terms of its temporal orientation from sort of the Islamic one, or at least the expansionist Islamic one. And again, I hate to preface this. Most Muslims don't think like this and are lovely and are kind, and I want my children.
So my issue is that the guy sitting on the fence trying to decide, am I going to go the Islamist route, or am I go just be a normal human being? I think he's swayed to go one direction or the other by where he sees more confidence, where he sees more interest, and where he sees victory. So when ISIS was gaining territory, lots of recruits because they were winning. But if ISIS is crushed on day one, if the Saudi theocracy is eliminated, if the theocrats around the world are destroyed, it turns out that November 4th, 1979, the taking of the embassy by Ayatollah Khomeini in Iran was a key moment in Islamist history, because it emboldened even Sunnis that said, oh, wow, if we can do it in Iran, if you can get rid of the Shah, Iran, a relatively secular, westernized country, then we could do it anyway. And they went to all these other countries, and really the modern Islamist movement was started then, Sunni and Shiite. And if you destroy those models for them, then I think, yeah, there are always going to be a few, always, right? But the passion, the growth, the excitement, the energy around it, I think dissipates.
Let's hope that you're right.
Well, nobody will ever do what I argue for. So we'll never actually test that theory. So we will see. I know that you know Tommy Robinson. So I just want to ask you. I don't know him. I've read a little bit about him, and obviously he's in jail now because of this. So I just wanted your view, because you've met him and about what he's like and what your evaluation is of what's happened to him.
Yeah. So one of the reasons I wanted to speak to him, one of many reasons, was precisely to attack the notion, the kind of grotesque notion, even coming from otherwise sophisticated people, that, my God, how could you talk to this neo-Nazi, bigot, right-wing extremist? Now, in all of the positions that I had seen him, I mean, yeah, sometimes he uses discourse that I would not use, but I had never seen truly outlandish hate from him. And so one of the reasons why I wanted to offer him certainly my platform was to hopefully show the world that he's actually quite a measured guy. And you can't imagine the number of people who have subsequently written to me and who've told me, I feel ashamed that I actually had bought fully the idea that he is basically Hitler. And then after seeing him on your show, he came across as a very reasonable guy that had no hatred in his heart, but that felt that his society should be protected. And so my interactions with him have been nothing but wonderful. I've never seen any sense, even when we spoke offline, not just, in the taped conversations, I never saw any hatred from him. Now, when it comes to what's happened to him, I think it's grotesque. I did a Sad Truth clip on it recently. I mean, it's amazing how many people wrote to me angrily saying, Saad, you're such a moron. Do you not realize that he broke the law and he was warned not to do this? But then the question is, why does such a law exist in the first place? Why is it that someone cannot be indignant and report about the industrial scale level rape of little children, right? I mean, if that is something that should not cause you indignation, then they would come back to me and say, but he is threatening the integrity of the case. These guys are going to... Look, it's all bullshit. We clearly know that people would love for him to just shut up and go away because if nothing else, they're embarrassed at having been complicit in the wholesale rape of children via their apathy. And so I think it's grotesque, and he will go down as an important historical figure.
So yeah, I mean, the law, if practiced consistently, one could argue about whether a law like that should exist or not. I don't know, but it's clearly not practiced consistently. So clearly he was singled out for prosecution. It looks like, and it's not that if you practice the law consistently and he knows the law, then he could have protected himself from it. You can still comment on the trial without being right there, but it clearly they were out to get him. Yeah. And it's really disgusting.
I've spoken to him off record where he shared with me. I mean, I won't get all the details, but of when he goes into prison. Let me tell you, if for no other reason, right? Most of our colleagues, the academic types, who navigate in cowardice, and then you see this guy who, again, whether you like him or not, whether you disagree with his positions or not, is putting his life on the line in such unbelievable ways. How could you not admire that?
Yeah. No, I agree. It really is horrible. So I noticed on a different topic, I noticed that you've been doing these videos on Carl Jung.
Hold on. I'm just channeling the Jungian drum beats archetypes. Okay, I'm ready.
Please no, because up until now I understood everything you said, and I like that. So, what motivated you? Is this part of this kind of BS detector?
It is BS detector. I wouldn't have cared about him were it not for the fact. Now people say, oh, you're doing this because despite the fact that you pretend you're friends with Jordan Peterson, you really hate him now because he's successful.
You're just jealous.
Right.
That's it.
And the reason, which I stated in my first thing, was that I receive a lot of emails and requests to weigh in on Carl Jung because he has been reinvigorated into the conversation by Jordan, right?
Yeah.
And therefore, what I was doing there is, after receiving the 13th trillion message asking me, hey, Dr. Saad, can you give us a sense of what you think of the astrologer of the human mind and grand bullshitter Carl Jung? These are my words.
Yeah.
And so now I sort of gave a bit of a thing with this trilogy of Jungian clips that I did. But now people are upset. Why aren't you spending more time actually delving into dismantling each of his positions? And my general point was, for the same reasons that I'm not going to come up with a series as to why creationism is bullshit. And it's not because I'm running away from it. Look, has he said anything that makes sense? Of course. He even used, as an evolutionary psychologist, he used evolutionary ideas. Some of them are wrong, but he certainly had some very nice insights about how evolutionary theory might be relevant in shaping archetypes. Sure. But is a lot of the stuff that he's written and said complete mystical occultism, new age, utter non-scientific bullshit? 100%. And I'm not going to waste my time re-prosecuting a case when psychologists have left Jung 50 years ago.
Yeah. And so what do you think Jordan is doing? I mean, is he finding the better stuff there, or is he bought into some of the BS?
I think it's a bit of both. I think that Jordan's message, look, when I sit down with Jordan on my shows or in other times when we've met and so on, and we're doing sort of just hardcore science stuff, it's fantastic. But his greater message, where, you know, he's also a self-help guru and so on, in a sense, it is more powerful if it includes elements of the Jungian stuff and the quasi-religious stuff, and right? You become a lot more of an apostle and a true guru of how to lead one's life if you incorporate some of that mystical bullshit. So I don't know if he does it willfully or whether he's done it because it ultimately taps into some of his greater goals. But in a sense, I'm quite disappointed in it. And as I explained in my clip that I recently released, where I said, look, Jordan and I could be great allies on 95% of things, but I could disagree with him on some things. And that's not because I hate him or I'm jealous of him. That's because I wouldn't have the intellectual integrity that people know me for if I suddenly say, oh, but when it comes to Jordan, if he ever says anything that I consider bullshit, I'll keep my mouth shut. That makes no sense.
Yeah, no, and I think that's absolutely right. I mean, people are so afraid of, intellectuals criticizing one another. I mean, but that's what we do, right? I mean, part of what we do is we debate ideas, we discuss ideas. And as long as it doesn't become personal, as long as what we're talking about is in the realm of ideas, this is what we do. And to stay silent when somebody else is saying something that you think is bullshit is wrong.
Right.
It's just, it's not honest.
And look, I'll give you one or two examples of other things, which I'm not sure if I've weighed in on this publicly or not. Yep. So, Jordan argues about, how could you have morality without this Judeo-Christian foundation? Yeah. We would each be these selfish, psychopathic agents.
Well, we can talk about selfish. I mean, talk about the use of that word.
Right, true. And so when I see something like this, I mean, it really holds me back. To me, that statement would be like me saying on a public forum, everybody knows that the earth is flat. There is no proof that the earth is not flat. And so that position that there is no clear, unequivocal, unassailable scientific basis of morality is so outlandish that it borders on saying that the earth is flat. So when I now criticize that position of Jordan, it's not I hate Jordan. I love Jordan. Jordan is a lovely guy. He's a friend. I would love to have him over for dinner. But do I think that particular statement is false? Yes.
Yeah, and we agree on that completely. We might come out with a different outcome of what morality is, but we agree that, I mean, it's ridiculous, but it's a commonly held belief. I mean, Jordan is not unusual here. Jordan is the mainstream.
Yeah.
I think we're the ones who are unusual. Sam Harris says we can bridge the is-ought gap. I believe we can. I believe we can bridge the is-ought gap. That science does lead to morality. You can find more. You can find your moral values and virtues from a scientific analysis of human nature and of reality. But the common view, reflected by Jordan and Prager and Ben Shapiro, but really by everybody out there, is that no, you need some external something that is not understandable to give you morality. Otherwise, you become a murderous. Otherwise, you become an animal with no capacity to reason and control yourself.
I always say that, were it not for the Torah, I would right now be looking to decapitate puppies and rape their headless bodies. It is only through reading Deuteronomy and the 5 books of Moses that I refrain from raping dead puppies, right? It is so laughable that and by the way, the reason why I feel a tension in criticizing Jordan, because on the one hand he is a friend, but on the other hand, as he is becoming bigger, then my commitment to truth supersedes my affection for our friendship, right? And so I'm torn, right? Because I don't want to be attacking him in the same frontal, no nonsense way that I sometimes can. And so I'm torn, right? Because I do think that there are so many things on which him and I are such simpatico allies, freedom of speech and all that, right? But for example, when it comes to postmodernism and his attacks on postmodernism and my attacks on postmodernism, that's great. But then if I ask you, so do you believe in God? And your answer is, what do you mean by what do you mean by believe in God? Then I'm taken back. So are you now satirizing postmodernists, or have you become the king of postmodernists, right? So this is why I'm a bit conflicted regarding Jordan, is because I think in the grand scheme of scales, it's fantastic what's happened with him, and I only wish him the best, but I'd like for him to cut down a bit on the bullshit.
I think you get the Torah all wrong, because my reading of the Torah, they actually teach you how to decapitate puppies. And
touche.
I remember those passages.
For those of you who say we only criticize Islam, look, we're criticizing now the holy books of Judaism, and we think they're also bullshit, you see?
I do it all the time, so people are used to it from me. But, yes, there's no free speech in Judaism. When Moses come down from the mountain with the 10 Commandments, and some of the Jews are worshiping a golden calf, he doesn't calmly put them down, go over and say, you have your freedom of religion, go do your thing, just leave us alone. He drops them because he's so angry. He picks up a sword with his brother and slaughters, I think it's 30,000 people that day.
Is that how much?
And God rewards him, right? And he gets a reward from God for doing that, because he stood up for the true religion. So don't give me this religion of peace about Judaism or about Christianity. None of them are religions of peace. Faith does not go well with peace.
Exactly right. Beautiful.
Because it's only reason. It's only a capacity to argue and debate and use reality as the standard of truth that allows for peace. Because then the truth, we can discuss it. But once it's my faith versus your faith.
Yeah. Well, and earlier you were talking about, any idea should be debated. What's the peer review process, right? I spend years working on some project, right? Years to come up with the topic, and then collect the data, and then write the paper. And then you send it off to a journal, and let me summarize it for you. Your shit, go away. We're rejecting it, right? Yep. I don't go on a jihad. I expect that for my paper to eventually be published, it has to pass the highest level of scrutiny. So why am I subjected to that lens, but Islam or Judaism or Jungian bullshit is not, right?
Absolutely.
Everything is fair game.
Absolutely. No, I think you're absolutely right. To me, the biggest danger with what Jordan is doing is his connection of morality with religion, and the idea that morality cannot exist outside of religion. I think that's a very, very dangerous trend, because it means, in spite of his interpretation of Abraham, which is complete bullshit, it means morality is authoritarian, right? That's the essence of the story of Abraham. You kill your son because I told you to.
Right.
Morality is whatever I tell you to, right?
Right.
If not that I'm God, but if I was, and it's very religious morality. It's always authoritarian morality.
Well, I think it shows, by the way, that even sophisticated thinkers, and I don't mean to be patronizing, but it's truthful.
He is a sophisticated
He is a sophisticated thinker who's got great depth, and I know it better than most. Can still be prone to being parasitized by idea pathogens, right? So in his case, his particular blind spot, and perhaps we all have blind spots. Some will argue that my blind spot is that I love animals, but yet I eat burgers. That's my behavioral blind spot, perhaps. But his blind spot is, I think, that given his own religious bent, he has constructed, an epistemology that is quite puzzling to most of us who otherwise respect him for his intellect in other domains.
Well, and it's an outcome of his metaphysics, because his metaphysics, that's where he gets it wrong. His metaphysics is, to some extent, a kind of primacy of consciousness metaphysics. Reality exists because we think of it.
Right.
And it's not, reality's independent of our own consciousness, and our consciousness job, if you will, is to identify what is out there. It's to identify it and then integrate it and reason, use it for thinking. So I think he goes wrong in metaphysics, and then that kind of takes him away. But that's religion.
That's religion.
That's religion. It's a tough one. Oh wait, let's jump into and I don't know how much time, if you have time constraints.
As much time as you need or you want, until you get tired of speaking to me. Which basically means it's ad infinitum, because to get tired of speaking to me is an impossibility.
Exactly. Exactly. The only part I might get tired of is listening, because I like to talk. So that's
well, there you
challenge.
Go. Okay, I'll try to keep more quiet.
No. You're doing great. I did not mean that. I meant the part of me liking to talk, not the part of listening. So let me posit something and tell me if you agree or disagree or how this fits in. I mean, it strikes me, and I believe in free will. I think you do, from what I've heard. I know Sam doesn't, but I think you do. So my view is that that every one of us, there's a component, evolutionary component, there's a genetic component that has a say in who and what we are. There's clearly environmental component. There's influences, and then there's the choices we have made along the way to engage with our minds, or not to engage, to be lazy, or to use our reason. And that, to me, that is the most important component, and that in a sense can override the others. In that's what makes us human, our ability to override them. Does that make sense? Is that the way you think about the world?
So let me take out the free will conversation from the discussion for a bit. There are many points on which detractors of evolutionary psychology will like to focus on, each of which are perfectly incorrect. Some of them are scientifically based, but most of them are ideologically based. In other words, most of the people who hate something about evolutionary psychology, it's because it attacks their essential pet ideology of theirs. So if I am religious, I hate evolutionary psychology because where is God in your thing? If I'm a postmodernist, I hate evolutionary psychology because there are no human universals. If I'm a radical feminist, I hate evolutionary psychology because it's not true that there are evolved sex differences, and so on and so forth, okay? Yep. So one of the things that people argue regarding evolutionary psychology is they say, but it is a form of, it is not a form, it is the form of biological determinism. If you provide a biological, evolutionary, genetic explanation for a phenomenon, then this argues that we are a slave to simply execute that algorithm. And of course, that is profoundly idiotic, because for most things, not all, but for most things, as you correctly said, we are an interaction of our genes and our unique environments. Even genes themselves get turned on or off depending on environmental inputs. So the correct position that all evolutionists take is the interactionist position. So to argue that something is biological based doesn't remove the influence of the environment. So anybody who tells you that evolutionary psychology is biologically deterministic is simply advertising, I'm a moron who doesn't understand anything. That's all he's saying. Okay. So on that issue, it's clear. The issue of free will, I'm kind of puzzled by it. And I should mention, I haven't done enough reading on all of the different, schools of thoughts on free will. But if I were to summarize given my very limited reading and exposure to sort of the free will debate, Sam Harris and Jerry Coyne, both of whom have been on my show and are good friends, basically argue, look, we are nothing more than basic natural laws. And if you unfold all of the cascading, physical reactions that are all materialist, then we arrive at the point that we're at, and that's it. It could be nothing else. That seems profoundly unimpressive to me. Here's another one that they usually say. The brain will oftentimes there's a delay between when you recognize that you're going to do something and the neuronal signature. That, again, doesn't suggest that you don't have free will. It literally just means that there is a neuronal lag between you being aware of it and your brain actually manifesting that neuronal activation pattern. So to me, maybe because I'm not into all of this sort of mental masturbation, I see it as a profoundly useless debate. Because if free will is something that doesn't exist, then I'm really wasting my time trying to study psychology of decision making. Because what is, let's all go and have a beer, right? So I might be missing something, and I'm sure there will be tons of messages at the bottom of this comment saying, I thought that Saad was smart, but my God, what a moron. He doesn't understand free will. To me, of course we are bound by physical laws, but ultimately, when I'm trying to decide whether I'm going to marry person A or B or buy Coke or Pepsi, I don't understand where the free will conversation comes in. Maybe you can enlighten me.
Well, I mean, it's an ancient conversation. It goes back to Greek philosophers, and it's being debated to no end. And I'm not a philosopher, so I'm not going to try to kill that. But even with the neurological issue, right? So, what example do they use? Raising your hand, and I'm quite willing to accept that whether I raise my hand at every given point in time is determined by lots of other things that come beforehand. So where do you put the essence of what free will is, the engagement of free will? I start by the fact that, first of all, I know I have free will because I know I have free will. I can tell that I'm making choices. Something is making a choice, and by very word that we use, choices, decisions.
Can I tell you what they will respond to that? They will respond to that. Forgive me for interrupting you. They will respond that
it's an illusion.
It's exactly. You've evolved the illusion because it makes sense for you to be deluded in that way via that free will illusion.
That is the same argument the postmodernists give to me when I say, this is a pen. It's an absolutely unequivocal. I can see it and I can touch it. Well, to me, introspection is like seeing and touching just about you, about your own nature. You cannot, reason doesn't mean anything if there's no free will. It's just a straightforward physical, biological process that we engage in. All the decisions have already been predetermined in a sense. And even if you have the environmental component, well, that's again just deterministic, and it's all just deterministic. It's one big. To me, so Rand's view is that the essence of free will is this idea of engaging your mind or disengaging it. Focus, like you get up in the morning and you kind of dozed off, you're half asleep, and you actually make an effort. Okay, I'm going to focus now. Or you sit down to write a paper, right? You sit down to write the research, and you say, okay, I'm really going to focus now. That focus is what is the essence of free will. In a sense, everything flows from that. Now, can I explain it biologically? Can I explain it physically in terms of, no, but there are lots of things I can't explain in science. You can't yet explain physically or biologically, but I can see it. Right, in a sense, I can see it in myself. Now, yes, you can say it's an illusion, but then we might all be just in a vat, right? And this could all be a dream. That's the same argument. It's a silly argument. We have to rely on our senses. We have to rely on our own observations about the world.
But how and again, maybe someone's already proposed this argument, so please hold your hate mail. I'm a novice on this debate, if only because I found it profoundly unsatisfying as a point of discussion. I mean, I don't mean that you bring it up, but just as something that I'm willing to spend reading 2,000 years. Right? But let's. What if I were a machine that simply does? So actually, I'm called the GAD machine. So that if you present me with two women, the manifest preference that I would choose is woman A. In other words, if all the cascade of all of the physical laws that would result in me instantiating my preference to woman A, I now create a not GAD machine. So whatever I was going to manifest as my choice, I now choose the opposite of that. Yep. Right? So then what would that be? Would that be that, but that's simply the cascade of neuronal, I mean.
Yeah. And you see, you can't, it might be possible to create a machine that we from the outside cannot tell if it has free will or not. But we have experiences. We have a consciousness. We experience life, right? Machines don't experience.
Right.
They're not conscious. Animals have experience, and maybe they have some free will. It's hard to tell if they make choices or not. But we, through introspection, can tell that we're making choices. So I agree with you. It matters because there's no morality if we're all deterministic. Nothing matters if we're all deterministic. Right. What's the point of studying things if we're all deterministic? We go to the beach, and I don't even know what that matters.
So let me ask you this. So what is the main reason? Maybe this is too difficult of a question. What is the fundamental intellectual reason for this debate? So, for example, you might say, well, for some people, they want to argue that there is no free will because that serves to excuse people's actions, and they want to be softer on crime. I'm making this up. I don't know. Yeah. So what is the intellectual pull of this conversation that I'm missing?
Well, the intellectual pull is in philosophy, certainly moral agency, right? Are you responsible? I think that's the fundamental. I think for somebody like Sam, and I'm speculating here, and I'm sure he'll contradict me, but he wants to be a scientist. He wants everything to be grounded in science, and he views free will as mystical somehow. It's this little spark of God.
Right.
And the truth is that in the past, most defenders of free will have defended it on mystical grounds. And so I think he's thrown out the baby with the bathwater when he rejects religion, and he's rejected everything mystical, and I'm all for that. I'm rejecting for everything mystical, but I don't think free will has to be viewed as mystical. It might be something we still don't understand. There's a lot of phenomena in the natural world we still don't understand, but it's a natural phenomena that we can all observe just as we observe any other scientific phenomena. And I think that's what you're saying is, look, I deal with free will all day. I don't call it that because I deal with choices, but without choices, this is all just mechanistic. It would be uninteresting if I was just analyzing the decision-making of robots.
So what would he
always look as an algorithm? Yeah.
So what would he say? And again, I'm asking you to put yourself in his. And it's only because you probably are much more familiar with this debate than I am. So when I wake up every day and try to understand the evolutionary roots of human behavior, what would Sam say about that exercise? Is it still worthwhile? Because notwithstanding the fact that we don't have free will, at least it allows me to predict behavior better. Would that be his position?
He would say, and again, this is me trying to channel Sam Harris, which is very hard because he's brilliant, and I mean he's a phenomenal mind. But my guess is what he's saying is the more knowledge we have, the more inputs into our computers, the better decisions, the better outcomes we will have. So while I'm not choosing, but the more exposed I am to truth, the more information the computer has, the better the outcome coming out of it. I think that's how he'd explain it.
I'm not moved, but okay, thanks for the explanation.
Okay. So let me try this on you. Again, from an epistemological perspective, trying to understand what it is exactly that's coded in terms of evolutionary psychology, what it is that's coded in our genes. So I'm just going to divide kind of human experiences or human, I'm not sure exactly what the general title here. We've got certain inclinations, we've got emotions, and we've got ideas. Now, to me, ideas are not something that can be encoded, because epistemologically, ideas come from our interaction with reality, and we have to be alert and aware and a reasoning being in order to get ideas. But I can see inclinations being encoded. Does that make sense?
So it depends how you define. I'm not being postmodern on you, but
No. That does depend how you define it. Everything depends on how you define it.
So let's take an example. and then you tell me whether this is an idea or whether it's an inclination, to use your nomenclature.
Sure.
So let's say how we respond to beauty, or how we specifically respond to beautiful faces. So evolutionary psychologists argue that all other things considered, a more symmetric face is across the world viewed as more beautiful than an asymmetric face, because of certain signals that symmetry exudes or embodies.
Yeah.
Okay. So now the question becomes, well, is that something that is learned, or is that something that is inscribed? And the way that you would test that in this case, there are many ways to establish that something is part of our biological blueprint. One of the ways is through developmental psychology. You could take children who are not yet at the age whereby they could be socialized. By definition, they haven't reached that cognitive developmental stage. You could show them photos of people's faces that vary on symmetry, and then you could simply watch how long they gaze at one, or the first one that they gaze at, or the first one that they try to touch, right?
How young could you do this with kids?
You could around 6 months old. I think the study that I'm thinking of is maybe 6 to 9 months old. Similar thing you do, for example, with toy preferences, because the social constructivists will argue that it's the socialization of teaching little boys to play with blue trucks and teaching little girls to play with pink dolls that starts the cascade of gender role socialization. Well, you could take children who, again, are cognitively speaking too young. They're infants, 6 months old, 9 months old, and you could show that they already exhibit those sex-specific preferences. So what evolutionary psychology has is a very, very broad range of data that it can use to unequivocally demonstrate that something is part of our biological heritage, which, by the way, speaks to something that really annoys me from the detractors of evolutionary psychology, when they argue that evolutionary psychology is pseudoscience where you just come up with just so stories. It is the exact opposite of that serious evolutionary psychologists do. Because to really build an adaptive argument, to argue that something is an adaptation, you have to build what... So I talk about this in one of my recent papers, nomological networks of cumulative evidence. What does that mean? You have to find data stemming from different cultures, different time periods, different paradigms, different methodologies, all of which point to the unassailable truth of that statement that you're making. Charles Darwin himself had done exactly that in Origin of Species. Now, he didn't call it nomological networks, but what did he do? Over a 30-year period, he collected tons of data from radically different sources. Once you put it together, you can't counter his natural selection argument. And so to go back to your question, so is the innate preference for certain beauty markers an inclination or an idea?
So I suspect it's an inclination that then we build ideas over. So there are a number of things. So one is I've met a lot of women who, wow, beautiful. And then after 10 minutes, they look like unbelievably ugly to me, right?
You don't like their personalities.
Yes, because their personalities have come through and it changes how I look at their face, right?
Right.
So so that to me is, yes, the inclination is there, but once I learn more about what beauty means to me today is more than the symmetry, because I've integrated that preference with a whole set of other ideas. And now when I see their personality, I can't even see the beauty anymore. It's gone. So they're not beautiful to me anymore. Of course, artists know, and Michelangelo and Da Vinci and all of those great artists all knew that there's certain symmetries, there's certain patterns, there's certain, pyramids of shapes that the human being responds to positively in a way that they don't respond to other things. Certainly, to use a Jordan Peterson thing, we don't respond well to chaos, right? Unless you're a modern artist, and we can talk a lot about modern art, but in terms of real art, we don't respond well to chaos. We respond to certain patterns, and I think that's an inclination. I mean, I don't know the science. You do, and it sounds like there's, but I think we build on that. So we take an inclination, and then we build an abstract idea of beauty that's got a foundation in our inclinations that becomes the idea of beauty.
Right, and so I guess maybe that also relates to, more broadly, the idea, for example, of a meme to a memeplex, right? A meme is the sort of smallest unit of, it could be an idea that spreads from brain to brain using something akin to, the propagation of genes. The memeplex is the collection of ideas. So religion is a memeplex, whereas a singular ad slogan would be just a meme, right?
Yep.
So I think that's what you're speaking of. You have a set of biological inclinations on which we then build a bigger edifice of ideas. Fair enough.
Yeah, I think epistemologically they're different, because the one is in a sense somehow coded, ingrained, and the other we have to gain evidence from reality and apply reason. And I think the only way to do this is by application of reason, integrate, but the foundation is there with that inclination. Right. So that inclination serves as the I don't know, a foundation on which you build a house. Right?
And I would say, so just to build on what you're saying, so take, for example, something like the innate, some people don't like the term innate, but colloquially we understand what it means. Take the innate penchant for men to seek social status, right? So the universal is, if you like, the Darwinian rule is seek social status. Now, the manner by which you instantiate that will vary across individuals. And that, by the way, shows you that it's not deterministic, right? So you and I share a common desire to ascend the social hierarchy, because that will get us greater access to women. But I may choose to do it by becoming a famous professor. You may choose to do it by being a great diplomat or a painter or a soccer player or whatever it is that you choose. So that's what then creates behavioral heterogeneity, right? Because a lot of people think, oh, but if something is a human universal, that implies that every single outcome will be exactly the same. We will all, no, we can instantiate the same Darwinian rule in radically different ways.
But so this is where I've got a problem, right? Because social status is not something that I think in terms of and think about the world in terms of. I want to be good at what I'm good at, and I don't, because I want to be good at it, because it adds to my self-esteem. It hurts me. I'm not looking for women, as my wife will tell you, and I don't think about. The social, with social media, I think about what other people are doing, right? Because you measure it in terms of likes and stuff like that. But in most of what I do in life, I don't think about how this affects other people. I think about whether what I'm doing is true and right or good. And often I lose people more when I do something on Twitter or something than I gain. So I've never throughout my life ever thought in terms of social status, or found myself seeking it qua social status, rather than I want to be the best that I can be at what I am doing for me. This relates a little bit to the selfishness before, right. But
that sounds like Ayn Rand, yes.
Yes, and Ayn Rand's where I come from. So I think if I think about particularly, I don't know, a Galileo doesn't seem like what he's doing is to attain women. I mean, he's doing it because he's got a passion for the truth, and he's trying to prove, and he's following where reason will take him, rather than following where his need for sex takes him.
Are you ready?
Sure.
As if I hadn't already blown your mind, get ready to have your mind blown. What you're describing is the difference between, epistemologically, one of the most important things to know about evolutionary theorizing, and that is the difference between proximate explanations and ultimate explanations. Okay? Proximate explanations explain the how and what of a phenomenon. Most of what scientists do and have done throughout all of recorded history has been at the proximate level. Most Nobel Prizes are won at the proximate level. It explains how a mechanism works.
Yep.
What are the factors that affect the mechanism? The ultimate explanation, ultimate doesn't mean superior, it's ultimate, it's better. Ultimate in the Darwinian sense, it is the ultimate Darwinian why. Why would the phenomenon have evolved to be of that form, right? So even though you may not do the things that you do with a conscious recognition that the ultimate goal is to get women, your behavioral system, your emotional system, your cognitive system at the proximate level has evolved to pursue things that ultimately cater to that ultimate goal. Do you follow what I mean? So even though you don't say, I'm getting up today to write a book because hopefully I'll get a lot of hot women to have sex with me, you care about your reputation. You care about people liking your ideas. You don't wake up every day and say, here's what I plan to do today. I plan to be lazy, apathetic, and hopefully say as many dumb things as I can on as broad a public forum as possible, right? So therefore, even though you don't consciously appear as though you are slave, quote, to the ultimate goal, that is what you're doing. So Galileo cared greatly about what his colleagues thought of him, and whether we like it or not, it ultimately relates to some fundamental ultimate goals. Do you follow what I'm saying?
Yeah. So why does a lot of questions actually. Okay. So why does some people are lazy and do nothing and go on, social media and say stupid things that are turning them into the opposite of what would attract?
Because the random combination of each of our genes that makes our unique personhoods are such that we don't every single moment of every day pursue life as though we are perfect executors of these biological drives, right? If that were the case, then we would be these perfect beings, right? I mean, why do people succumb to anorexia nervosa? Why do people get addicted to heroin, right? So I can answer that very quickly. So in two of my books, I talk about exactly that question. If we are such adaptive creatures, I mean, this speaks to your point. Why do people do stupid shit, right? If we are these adaptive creatures, why do we succumb to maladaptive realities? And the way that I answer it in a grand sense, without getting into the details, is that each of these cases, anorexia nervosa, pornographic addiction, pathological gambling, are misfirings of adaptive processes. Do you follow what I mean? So there is an adaptive process which, if it fires within the adaptive range, leads to good outcomes. But sometimes it's more inactive. Sometimes it's more hyperactive. And that, by the way, cancer is that.
Sure.
Right?
Sure.
And so I think you could totally put within the rubric of evolutionary theorizing why we do all sorts of stupid shit.
Yeah. So I would say that those people are not engaging their reason and defaulting to being determined by the misfiring. But if you engage your reason, you're not susceptible to that. So reason is really the evolutionary tool that allows us to take control over that and not to leave ourselves at the random whim of the misfiring.
But do you think that in all circumstances, your capacity to have access to that reason faculty is always there? So, for example, I am a heroin addict. At that moment, it is impossible for me to engage what you're calling my reason faculty because
no question.
Okay.
If you screw yourself up enough times, right? If you default on the capacity to reason enough times, you will lose the capacity to bring it back, or at least under some circumstances. Maybe if you go sober and you completely, redo your life and you rethink it, then you can get on the right track. But it takes a lot of work. Reason takes a lot of work. Falling off of reason, ignoring reason, becoming a religious mystic, whatever, is easy. And then going back to reason would take a lot of work. But I think that what makes us human is our ability to override, right? Our ability to take control over all these influences, the misfirings, and to really channel our lives in a positive direction.
So let me ask you. Let me ask you this. So so we know that both men and women have evolved both a desire to pair bond, and also to stray. In other words, we are certainly animals that wish to have sexual variety. So if I am married and I have a wonderful wife whom I don't wish to lose, but there is an opportunity for me to execute my Darwinian program of seek multiple, sexual conquest, how would I seek my reason faculty to go through this particular choice that I have to make?
I mean, the essence of it is to think, right? What are the consequences of the action? What is the consequences short term? More importantly, what are the consequences long term? Does this involve dishonesty towards my wife? If it involves dishonesty towards my wife, what does that lead to? One of the best things Jordan Peterson does, in my view, is his discussion on honesty. It's his discussions on honesty are, brilliant, because I think dishonesty is very, very damaging and very, very harmful to you, and therefore to the people who are surrounding you. So if you're not engaging your reason, then hey, there's a hot chick at the bar, right. and Ben Shapiro has used that example to criticize many of my views. If you're an egoist, then hey, there's a hot chick at the bar. You just go and have the hot chick. But no, if you really care about your life, then you stop and you think, okay, yeah, there's a hot chick on the bar. I might get some pleasure from sleeping with her, although again, even there, I think sexual pleasure is not only physical, it's also spiritual, and therefore it has a dimension that is affected by who you're sleeping with, just like beauty is impacted by who is beautiful. And therefore I engage my reason and say, it's probably, given that I'm probably going to have to lie to my wife about this, and I've got a contract with her and I'll be violating the contract. Now we can discuss whether the contract is valid and whether there should be a contract, but then we'll really get into trouble if we do that. But so I would say that's where reason comes in, and you don't act on the impulse. You act as a human being. That's the difference between us and animals, is we don't act on the impulse. The animal doesn't have a choice. We have a choice, free will, if you will, to act on the decision, to think it through and to analyze the consequences. And some of us do that, and some of us don't. We know lots of guys who don't do that.
So at one point you said, honesty, don't lie. And by the way, when it comes to these kinds of issues, I'm very much of a deontological guy. There are absolute truths that you should follow. But then later you said, we think about the consequences, which leads to another set of ethical, rubric, which is consequentialism, right? So deontological would be, I never lie. Yes. It's an absolute statement.
But why don't you lie?
Okay, so
why did you come to that deontological conclusion? See, I would say that I came to that deontological conclusion, that absolute, unequivocal moral decision, because I've evaluated the consequence and have generalized that lying, given my nature as a rational being, given the consequence it has, is a bad thing. I do that once, I come up with a principle, and then I never lie again.
So here's my. Forgive me. I'm offering.
No, that's fine.
We're playing devil's advocates, because otherwise we'll agree on most things, and people will get upset. While these two guys were doing I hate that term, circle jerk. I despise that term.
Stupid.
It's such a vulgar term. But anyways, so let me ask you this then: isn't it the position that you're taking potentially unfalsifiable in the following way? Right. It reminds me of how the classical economists would argue that any choice that you make is ultimately what the manifestation of maximizing your utility is, right? Yes. So therefore, that which I do is what led I arrived at through my reason. So what about the guy who says, I am going to weigh all the calculus that Yaron just did, and from my reason calculus, it makes perfect sense for me to potentially take the risk to sleep with this really beautiful girl with the beautiful behind.
Yeah, and be dishonest. No, I think that's a great question and an appropriate question. I think there are absolute moral standards, so the deontological standards, that you can say that being dishonest is wrong always. Now, I know that by induction from experience, that is by inducing, not just from my experience, from knowing human nature, understanding how reason functions, the destructive role dishonesty has in your own mind, not just other people, all of that. I know that through both seeing the world out there, understanding my own nature. So morality, the moral principle, should be those absolute principles that are consistent with human flourishing, with individual human success. And that's what morality should study. So this is where, put on my moral philosopher hat. So this is Aristotle. Like Aristotle's project was, the goal should be individual human flourishing. How do we get there, right? What are the principles that lead us to individual human flourishing? I think that's what morality should study, right? It shouldn't study sacrifice and how to treat other people devoid of purpose. It should study what are the things that lead to successful human flourishing scientifically. And this is where science and morality go hand in hand. And I think it doesn't take much to show, for example, that dishonesty is scientifically bad for you, for every human being, qua human being. So that if that person is doing that calculus, then he's deceiving himself, and he's taking an action that's bad for him. And this is why I disagree with economists. I think people do things that are bad for them all the time. I think people are not utility maximizers. I wish, given that if utility meant anything, I wish they were utility maximizers, but they're not. They do stupid things. They don't think. They don't engage their reason. They don't evaluate. So yes, I think there are moral principles that hopefully every human being at some point discovers and integrates them and then never violates them.
So look, one side of me very much agrees with you that there are a set of deontological principles that I like to live my life by, almost to the point of it being maladaptive. So my mother used to always say, Gad, the world doesn't operate according to your purity bubble. And what she was referring to was the fact that I was this sort of very, very pure guy who lived by standards that just the world is going to constantly violate, and I'm going to be unhappy. But on the other hand,
successful.
Well, thank you. But on the other hand, I also think that we have behavioral plasticity, right? So, and again, that speaks to the earlier point that we talked about when we talk about determinism, right? So, the same behavioral strategy might be optimal in condition A, but might be suboptimal in condition B. So, for example, if I were to abide by the deontological statement, I never lie, and then my wife, whose birthday is tomorrow, comes to me with that dress and says, hey, Gad, do I look fat in that dress?
Why is that the example all guys always bring up when discussing honesty? Always.
But because we're Darwinian beings, and that's one of the places where we are oftentimes forced to lie. And then you have two choices at that point. You either adhere to the deontological position, or you go, no, sweetie, you look gorgeous.
So all human knowledge is contextual.
Okay.
And the context has to be taken into account. Me and my wife, we have a certain game, right, with regard to the dress, right? And with her, the game is I have to tell her the truth, otherwise she'll really be angry. But most people don't. Most people, there's a game. Do I look fat? And you're expected to say no. You look beautiful. It's amazing, and it's a game, and it's not about reality, because everybody participating in the game knows that's a game. There are other examples. If the Nazi comes knocking at my door and says, where are the kids? I want to take them to concentration camp. Of course you lie, because the context of every decision should be your life, right? Life. So if nobody has a right to anything, including the truth, at the expense of your life, right? So the life is always the context in which every deontological concept, fits in. Right. So yes, I think they're universals within the context of lifeboat scenarios are a lot of morality. When you take a morality class, it's usually the trolley. You push one lever, you kill 5 people, another lever, you kill 10. And my argument, who cares? I mean, first of all, that's not morality. That's just stupid. You're never going to be in that trolley. Morality is about what you do every day in your life. Morality is about how you live your life. It's not about trolleys. It's not about lifeboats. In a lifeboat scenario, it doesn't matter what you do. You're screwed either way, right? And with a trolley, you're screwed either way. There's no right answer. But in life, there are right answers. So yes, there are going to be exceptions that are emergencies or just unusual circumstances. But 99.9% of the time, there are principles that guide your life that should lead you to success and happiness and flourishing. And we've got, hundreds of thousands of years of human experience to show us that it tends to work.
So what would be, say, the top 3 that you could think of that you use to guide your daily actions?
So to me, the number one, so there's one that integrates all the others, right? And that's be rational, right? Okay. Rationality. To me, that, take control over your own mind, take control over your own life. That's what rationality means. That's why I'm not dishonest, because I know that, garbage in, garbage out kind of thing. You don't want to mess up the mechanism of dealing with facts. And then you want to apply facts dealing with other people. And that to me is justice. You want to apply rationality to every aspect of your life. So reason, rationality would be kind of number one, and everything else would be a derivative of that. But Rand, we're going back down, Rand, came up with 7. And I think so. So you asked now productiveness, the idea, and this has a evolutionary psychology connection. I know. You want to be able to take care of yourself. You want to be able to put food on the table. You want to be productive in the world. You want to do things in the world to change your environment. It's where you get your self-esteem from. It's where we get our confidence about the world. So you want to be independent. You can't have other people thinking for you. Thinking demands that you do the thinking. Right. You want to be just. You want to be honest. You want to have integrity. I'm missing one, but pride is another one that's usually controversial. But
because it also goes in the 7 deadly sins. It is the root
yes.
of all of the other sins. Right?
Exactly. And to me, pride is so fundamental because pride, Aristotle called the queen of the virtues.
Right, exactly.
So Aristotle was the opposite of the Christian view of pride. Right. And Rand is much more Aristotelian in that sense.
But I think I not that I wish to argue that I'm going to reconcile those two conflicting views, but I'm going to reconcile the two. In French, there is a distinction between the two terms for pride, right? There's positive pride. I'm very proudful of my work. I'm proud of my achievements versus pride where, don't have pride in love. Be humble, right? In French, you have the two terms fierté and orgueil. Fierté is the positive connotation of the word pride. So that's a virtue. And orgueil, so if you say ne sois pas orgueilleux, do not be orgueilleux, that's the negative connotation, right? Yeah. Be humble in love. So I think it's interesting how in some languages it decouples the two meanings of pride, whereas in English you use the same term for both contexts.
I think it's one of the great values of having more than one language because you get that perspective on concepts, which I think people don't have. So I'm going to have to think about Hebrew and whether how pride now works in Hebrew.
It's interesting you say this because about languages, because one of I hope the only parental regret that I so far have with my 2 young children is that between my wife and I, we speak 5 languages, and yet our children only speak French and English. And all of the other, quote, exotic languages, so far, hopefully maybe we can remedy it, but we haven't, and you're exactly right, the amount that they are losing. So one of the things I talk about in one of my books is I take these evolutionary principles and I then demonstrate how in Arabic there is a exact term to capture that phenomenon. It doesn't exist in English, and maybe if I could take 2 seconds to describe it.
Sure.
So one of the sort of fundamental Darwinian modules. So there's survival, there is mating, reproduction, kin selection, and reciprocal altruism. And I know your relationship with altruism with Ayn Rand and so on. Okay.
Well, again, it's a question of how you define it. Right?
Exactly.
Definition is not important. Yeah.
Exactly. So in the Darwinian sense of reciprocal altruism, right? I tit for tat. I scratch your back, you scratch mine. Okay.
I call it trading.
Fair enough. Now, in Arabic, there is a term for something that you should never do, which is if you and I are good friends and I do something for you, I should never remind you of your indebtedness to me, because that violates the most fundamental social lubricant, which is that we build our bonds of affiliation through these reciprocal arrangements. And to do that, there's a term in Arabic, it's called tarbih jmile, right? If you do that, you are. But now look how many words it took me to explain it. But with just 2 words, boom, you get it in Arabic.
I know, it's beautiful. Yeah. I love languages in that sense, and I only know 2. My wife now knows 5, and she loves these kind of relationships and everything. Yeah. She's really. But yeah, we had a hard time getting our kids interested in Hebrew, and we lost interest in trying to get them to speak Hebrew.
Does she speak Hebrew?
Yeah, my wife and I we met in the Israeli army. Okay. So we're both Israelis.
You mean the Zionist occupation army?
Yes, the Zionist occupation army. There's a whole other topic, but we gave up partially because it's an exotic language, and it was very hard to be motivated to teach my kids a language that they would never really use, And I think so French is great. But practical language, Spanish, languages like that, would be great. If I went back, I would make an effort to really teach my kids those languages.
Well, the great news about my having Arabic as my mother tongue is that it is now the official mother tongue of most European countries. So when I go to so when somebody tells me they're going to France, I say, well, are you sure you want to go to France? Because I mean, you don't speak Arabic. Luckily for me, I could pass as anything
you
anywhere.
could go anywhere. Exactly. That's great. I have two of the worst languages possible and two of the worst passports possible.
Oh boy. Oh boy. Yeah.
And somebody at some point told me, because my parents were born in South Africa, they said you could get a South African passport, and I said, oh yeah, I need another one everybody hates. You know, what am I going to do with that?
Right.
A white guy from South Africa, not a good idea.
Oh boy.
Yep. Yeah. So that's we were talking about. I get these. I'm at the age where I fade out.
Well, okay, I'll tell you this before you fade out. What are the 5 languages that your wife speaks?
So Hebrew, English, Spanish, Portuguese, and French now.
Oh, very good.
Yeah, and she's working on the French. The others she's solid in, but French she finds the hardest in terms of picking up. Even though she has the Spanish and the Portuguese, she learned those very quickly. She uses Rosetta Stone. I don't know if you're familiar with Rosetta.
I mean, I'm familiar with it. I've never used it, but yes.
She picked up these languages so fast at a relatively late in life, in her 40s, and just amazingly did amazing. And she's fluent in Spanish and Portuguese now. It's we watch Brazilian television at home. So
the telenovelas.
She watches telenovelas and she watches the news from Globo. So she knows about American politics through the filter of Brazilian culture. So it's quite entertaining.
So let me summarize the Brazilian position on America. They suck. Is that roughly right?
Well, it's somehow we know they must have exploited us. We're not sure exactly how, but we know they've exploited us. We kind of admire them. We want to be like them, but we don't know how to do it. And it's probably them holding us back, so we can't compete with them. Well, yes, I mean, most of the world has this love-hate relationship with America.
Well, and none more so than Canada, right? Because Canada almost defines its identity as a sort of contra to its mean, bad, ugly brother to the south, right?
Yes, you're a European American.
That we're European American, and more so when you're in Quebec, right?
Because
then you've got another sort of unique, distinct culture. So, so it's a real mess.
You've got the French on top of it all. Wow. So I've got a lot of. I wanted to talk to you about advertising and morality of advertising, and given all this stuff, should we jump into that?
Go for it.
Okay, let me do that, and then we'll call it a. Okay. I've been told my videos are too long.
And then we can do another one at some other.
Yeah, we'll continue it another time. This is
sure.
Fun.
So the morality. Of
I did want to say something about pride. That's what I remember. So Rand called pride moral ambitiousness. So it's the idea that you want to be good. It's the idea that you want to be a good person. It's that pride, when they used to duel over, it's like honor. I want to be a good person, and I stand by my honor, my pride, I want to be as virtuous as I can be. I want to be as good of a person as I can be. And in that sense, I think it's a positive. In that sense, I know it's a positive, but there is a negative sense that the word is sometimes used as. But I think Christian morality confuses the two on purpose. Because they don't want you to be morally ambitious, because you cannot. You're born with original sin. You are fallen from day one, and you can't think of yourself as too good. That there's something. So they attack the legitimate sense of pride, not just what we consider bad.
Let me tell you a quick story, which probably will make it into my next book. I think I've only mentioned it once previously publicly, maybe on Joe Rogan's show. This is going to pit the negative connotation of pride with truth.
Yeah.
So it's kind of an interesting clash. So I was once having a conversation with a family member in my nuclear family, so not my wife and I, but the one that I was born into, with a older male member. I won't say who it is, who is very prideful in the negative sense. And we were having a conversation, and he sort of flippantly said, "Oh, those ancient Greeks, those Christians, they really hated the Jews," something to that effect. I said, "Oh, but I'm sorry to correct you. I don't mean to contradict you, but those ancient Greeks, weren't Christians." He said, "Well, what do you mean? Of course, Greeks are Christians." I said, "No. As a matter of fact, the way you mark the period is that, it's before Christ. So you're actually literally marking it as before them becoming Christians. So when it appeared as though he could not win that argument because just historically he was on the wrong side, what do you think he then did to salvage his pride and hence not be truthful? What do you think he did? I don't even think you could be so diabolical as to guess what he did, but take a shot.
No, I can't think of what he would do.
So then he says, no, that's right. I'm right. I'm the one who said that they weren't Christians. So he looks at me in the face. Do you get what? Do you get what I just did?
Yeah. Yeah.
This is a big, excuse my vulgarity, this is a big diss to my face, right? He's saying, when all else is lost and I have lost the debate, I will look at you in the face and alter our positions such that I come out as the one who won the debate.
Yep.
This is a perfect manifestation of the negative term of pride. I'm so prideful that I am willing to violate and rape truth and human dignity in the most transparent ways to maintain my...
So there has to be another word that reflects, because it would be a shame if we had to use pride in order to use that, because that is... And you have to know that I mean, you have to believe that causes him to be a miserable human being.
Well, I hope he won't watch the show. I think he won't. It does, because look, I mean, part of life is to have the epistemic humility to learn from others, right? I mean, think about it, right? I don't come into this conversation thinking that on every single issue I know more than Yaron. There are some things I know more. That's what makes the interaction exciting,
Absolutely.
right?
Absolutely.
So I think, in a sense, you are unhappy because you don't get to experience all the richness that the world, because you know more than everybody. A cardiologist can't teach me anything. I know more about the heart than he does. Well, then what experiences are there to learn if I already know everything?
Well, and of course, think of all the errors you make if you really live that, right? And they do, and then they make mistakes, because if you know more than the cardiologist, you won't agree with his diagnosis. But maybe at extremes that doesn't happen, but on a day-to-day basis, you might be doing lots of things that are bad for you because you're refusing to accept other people's knowledge that is superior to yours.
Absolutely right. Yep. You want
to in many ways.
You want to go back to morality of advertising?
Yeah. So my assumption is that a lot of marketing is doing a number of different things, right? So marketing is both trying to convey information to us about the availability of certain products and their characteristics, and trying to trigger us in terms of these inclinations, in terms of appealing to us through beauty or through whatever it happens to be. I think I saw you talk about Ferraris, which made me laugh, because I knew this guy who had a Ferrari and he had an Aston Martin, right? And so it was, did well.
So did my brother, by the way.
What's that?
So did my brother. He had three Ferraris and an Aston Martin.
So an Aston Martin and a Ferrari. And actually, this guy was the CEO of Playboy magazine, so that can connect to you as well, right? And I told him one day, I said, I've seen both your cars, and I really liked Aston Martin. I would take the Aston Martin over the Ferrari. And he looked at me and he said, "That's your feminine side."
That's your anima.
Aston Martin is a
anima
feminine car, and the Ferrari's masculine. What's that?
Well, I said, is it anima? Is it let's try to bring in the Jungian terms of Jordan.
Oh yeah, well, yeah. Then you definitely lose me, because I can't handle that.
So you're connecting to your feminine side. Got it.
Yes, I'm connecting my feminine. So that I remember that when I heard you talk about the Ferraris. Right. So to what extent are they trying to activate that, and to what extent would you consider? Because a lot of people say we're just manipulated by these advertisers. It's immoral because, that's the big critique of capitalism. We're just automatons that are driven by advertising and marketing. So just riff on that. I don't know if there's exactly.
Sure. Look, in most instances, the advertisers are doing the following. So let's take the example of fast food. They're saying the next time that your blood sugar level is down and you get that hunger signal, just choose us. They're not teaching you to love French fries and juicy burgers. That already exists, right? So the idea that advertisers are these evil, diabolical, nefarious creatures that can get us to do things that we otherwise wouldn't want. I mean, to some extent, at the margin, that's true. But try to convince people to eat grass juice, okay? And you'll have a very hard time, even if you had a $6 billion yearly advertising strategy and Justin Timberlake is dancing all the way throughout the commercial, right?
They sell those shots of that green, yucky stuff in some of these juice bars.
And how's that going for them?
You know, a few people do it, but no, exactly. It doesn't go well, right?
It's not taking over, right? So I think what advertisers do is exactly what you said, which is tell us about the availability. I mean, they provide us with information. And what they're basically saying is that to the extent that next time you're going to have some Darwinian pull get triggered, make sure that we win that competition. Don't go to Burger King, come to McDonald's, right? But they're not so good at peddling products that are against human nature, right? And so, because oftentimes people ask me, okay, well, it's great that you've got all these wonderful scientific theories about the evolutionary roots of consumer behavior, but from a practical perspective, who cares? And then here's one of the answers that I would give, which speaks to the point that you asked. Suppose you have a romance novel company. You know, the guys romance novels. Romance novels are almost exclusively read by women all around the world, right? And if you want to study the archetype, not Jungian, because the archetype doesn't just have to be Jungian, the archetype of the male hero in romance novels, it's always the exact same guy. He's tall, he's a neurosurgeon, he's also a prince, he wrestles alligators on a six-pack, he's reckless, and so on. But he is tamed by the love of this one good woman. It's the exact same archetype in every single romance novel. Well, a company came out at one point with the idea that they no longer wanted to succumb to this traditional role of masculinity. They were going to impose, they were going to teach the readers a new definition of masculinity, whereby the guy is sensitive, he cries, he listens to Taylor Swift music, he eats ice cream, and he cries when he's wearing his sweatpants, right? Well, guess what? Did that sell? It didn't sell. So that's the practical. Go ahead.
But again, we come back to choices, right? Because there is a sense in which they can sell, right? So there are people out there who are vegans. Now, God help them, and I don't understand how they can, resist that juicy hamburger, but they do, and I eat burgers, but I have. Maybe it's a self-delusion, but I only eat gourmet burgers. So I don't eat fast food burgers because I've convinced myself that they're not good for me. And I don't find them appealing anymore. I drive by a McDonald's and there's no desire to go in. So I've overridden some aspect of that of that inclination. So we do have in some respects, we do have some choice there or some control over these things.
Absolutely, right? Look, we have the Darwinian pull to stray from our marriage, but we also have the evolved moral calculus. And therefore these two, so again, that speaks to the determinism idea, right? No, there are at any given point, many Darwinian pulls are pulling me in different directions. And then it is, quote, my free will that allows me to choose from these different trajectories. But if I can just add one more element to the morality of advertising issue. So one of the things that I lecture about in my seminars on consumer behavior is, when is it ethical or moral to advertise to children? And usually the argument there is that you can do so at that age when the child has the cognitive apparatus to build counter defenses to your persuasive message, right?
Okay.
And so if that age is 10, then that's when it should be. Now, the reason why I mentioned this here, other than to answer your question, is because look how hypocritical this is. Because we build a legal framework so that we don't target children with cereal commercials, because Darwin forbid they might be influenced to ask their parents to buy cereal A. But which product do we sell them straight out of the womb? Do you know which one?
No.
Religion,
yeah.
Right?
Oh, great.
Right.
Yeah.
So look at
the one that will impact every aspect of their life for the rest of their life.
The one that will get them to feel that it is rational to fly planes into buildings and they are the moral ones. That one, we sold them that product straight out of the womb, but God forbid, pun intended, that we would sell them chewing gum when they're 11. So there's the grand hypocrisy of marketing.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great, I've never thought of that. That's a great example.
There you go. I think maybe that's a good one to end on.
Absolutely.
Not that I don't want to keep talking to you. It's such a pleasure.
No, we'll have to schedule another one because this is productive and fun.
That was really fun.
So, thank you.
Thank you so much, Yaron, and I look forward to our next chat. I'm going to
stop. And I'm looking forward to meeting you in person one of these days. So
likewise,
maybe the secret gathering of the intellectual dark web.
There you go. Cheers, buddy. Thank you. I'm gonna turn it